Yo, it's Friday the 13th, and we got another episode of the Beezy Baby podcast, and this one is titled The F Word. So, not the F word like fuck, the F word like forgiveness. Yo, forgiveness is a powerful F word. Tell you, because forgiveness can do a lot of damage if you don't handle it. You know, carrying around issues that you got with other people, you thinking that you holding grudges against them, but you really holding the world against yourself, because that's a lot of baggage you're carrying, you know? So I figured today I would open up about my journey with forgiveness and certain things that I had to deal with and how they helped me. And hopefully, if you have a forgiveness story, you can leave it in the comments. Maybe it'll be something that helps me or somebody else. Or, you know, if you vibe on what I'm saying and you like, love, or dislike what I'm saying, feel free to leave a comment. Trolls, you're welcomed. All right, so I want to talk about my journey to forgiveness with my mother, my father, and myself. So first we'll discuss, how I got to the point. So I wasn't raised with my father. I met him when I was like 15 and I was pregnant by then. And I remember the first time we met in a Dairy Queen parking lot, I remember thinking, like, I hated him. You know, I didn't understand how he could raise his other daughter and his other 3 sons, but have absolutely nothing to do with me. Like, I felt some type of way. You know, I felt like he abandoned me, like I wasn't good enough. That situation right there led to a lot of my problems as a teenager. So I harbored a lot of hatred towards my father. And I blamed him for a lot, whether it was right, wrong, or indifferent. That's what I did. So as I continued to grow up, I continued to make really bad decisions. I was very promiscuous. I treated men, I handled men and men handled me. Because I think a lot of that had to do with my lack of relationship with my father. Not having, a solid male role model who loved me genuinely. So I made a lot of mistakes. I ended up in my early 20s. I was going to court for a whole lot of stuff, man. Like 31 charges, 32 charges. And I got a phone call one night from my sister. I think it was my sister that called me and told me that my father was in the hospital, that he had tried to commit suicide. So I drove from Pennsylvania to Virginia. At this point, not really because I, really loved my father or, I didn't know how I felt. Honestly, I just knew that my father was in the hospital and there was a chance he wouldn't make it. And at that moment, that's all that mattered. So I got on the road. I went to Virginia. Up until this point, I didn't see my father as a human. Like, really, I need you to listen to what I'm saying here. Yes, I knew he was a person. I knew he was a human being, but I never saw him as a person for real. I never saw him as a person that had feelings, that had emotions. I never saw him as somebody that, that made mistakes. I saw him as the bad guy that left me. I saw him as somebody that made me feel unloved. I put him in a compartment that had pain titled above it. I didn't look at my father like a human, so I didn't see him for who he was. But when I walked in the hospital room and he was laying in that bed, at that moment, I saw human. I saw broken. I saw, oh my God, my dad has endured things too. He's made mistakes. He's suffering for things he never said. Because my dad was a really tough guy. Like, to me, I've never saw emotion on him. He was very tough. He was very powerful. But, I didn't know him to be weak or vulnerable. So at that moment, he looked vulnerable. He looked weak. And I remember asking him why he tried to kill himself. And as we talked about that, I saw broken. Like, I remember looking in his eyes and thinking, oh my God, he's in so much pain. But I never saw that before. And I don't think I never saw it because it wasn't there. I think I never saw it because I never looked at him, like truly looked at him. So at that moment, I realized I don't want my dad to die. I'm still angry and I'm still hurt, but I want us to have a chance. So I remember going to God. I was walking the hallway of the hospital and I was just praying like, God, please don't let my dad die. Please don't let my dad die. And I walked up to the doctor and asked him, what the likelihood was that he would make it out of this. And the doctor said, I'll be honest, it don't look good. And he has a do not resuscitate order. So if it gets too bad, we can't even bring him back. So I remember pulling my dad's wife to the side and, she said the same thing. He doesn't want to be brought back. And I had some choice words with her. And then I went back to God. And my dad did end up getting out of the hospital. It took him a while to get things back stabilized. In that process, I ended up going to jail for, the charges that I was out on bail for. While I was in jail, I was reading a book by Cecil G. Osborne called The Art of Understanding Yourself. So in this book, it talks about different things that people have gone through and how stress impacted them and how they dealt with different pains from childhood, or adulthood. And I saw myself in this book. So I'm like, in the book, it says that one of the ways to deal with things is to write letters. Like, write the person a letter that you feel did you wrong, that you're still suffering from some sort of action of theirs, and free them from it. Forgive them. So I was like, you know what? That's a good idea. I'm in jail. What do I got to lose? Ain't nobody write me anyway, right? So it ain't like they gonna stop if I send this letter. So I sat down, took my little really little, I ain't saying little, I'm saying it's a really little pencil. So I took the little pencil out in my paper and I penned a letter to my mom. And I penned a letter to my father. Each letter was about 10 pages, front and back. And I just poured my soul out on these pages. I let them both know how they had hurt me, how that impacted me, how the decisions they had made me feel. And at the end of the letter, I told them I forgive them, both. And I expressed my love for them both. And I mailed both of those letters off. My mother never responded, but my father did. And my father responded to the letter. He acknowledged my pain. He apologized for his behaviors. And he basically said, I'm ready to move on. I'm here now. And I want to be here. And it was so weird how that small gesture, it meant a lot to me. Because it was like, you see me now. And I see you. I understand that you're a human. I understand that you made mistakes. And I'm sitting in prison with 4 kids outside of these walls who are probably thinking about the mistakes I've made. So at that moment, it put me in a place where I was able to identify with my father as a parent and a human. And I forgave my father. My father was one of the only people to write me. Every week, I got at least 2, sometimes 3 letters from my dad. So I just pulled out this letter from March 28, 2009. And this is from my dad. So I'm just going to read you guys a little bit of it. So it starts off, "Hey, baby girl, are things okay with you? Hanging in there? I was laying here thinking about my kids and a thought ran through my mind. Everybody around me says I'm opinionated and way off sometimes when it comes to my views on any issue. But to me, it's just common sense. I've never had a male role model in my life. So I guess I'm what you might call a self-made man. I believe I stand up for my own beliefs. If anyone can prove me wrong or has facts to back their opinions, I'll change my direction. But to me, opinions without facts is just a fool making a foolish statement. You know your daddy doesn't trust anybody and values very few people's opinions." So I read that part of the letter because it highlights who my father was, but it also highlights who I am. And it wasn't until I got to know my father through all of those letters during my prison sentence that I began to discover not only who he was as a person, but who I was. Growing up with just my mother, I remember thinking sometimes, how come she's like that and I'm like this? How come she don't understand why I feel like this? This is common sense. Why don't she get it? And it's because though my mother raised me, I was just like my father. I had his values. I thought like him. I acted like him. I responded like him. So it was hard for me to figure out who I was until I understood who my father was. So forgiving my father was an important piece that was missing in my life up until that point. And forgiving him and getting to know him allowed me to truly come to terms with who I was and accept that and be okay with that. And, you can't truly love yourself if you don't know yourself. So I was having a hard time loving myself because I didn't know who I was. And mending that relationship with my father helped me to do that. Now, the relationship with my mother was a little different. She didn't respond to the letter. We never discussed the letter. My mother and I have never had a sit down, all out conversation about the nooks and crannies that was our relationship. But I can say today, I understand what my mother went through and how that led her to make some of the choices she did. I won't share her story because that's for her to do, but I will say my mother was a human being and my mother dealt with things. And she had her own survival stories and she had her own traumas. And those things made her not only the woman she was, but the mother she was. So did we have a perfect life? Not by any means. But do I think she did her best? Most definitely. And now that I'm an adult and I can see from a different perspective than I could when I was a child, it's easy for me to forgive her. Because I know that every layer I was at in my life, I did my best by what I knew. I made some mistakes. Those mistakes affected other people, including my children. And I had to ask them for forgiveness. And I had to grow to do better. And my mother had to do the same thing. My mother did her best. And that's all I could ever ask for. So because of that, I forgive her. Now, forgiving my mother and my father, those were easy compared to forgiving myself. All the choices I made, all the decisions that have impacted other people that loved me, when I think about how my selfish decisions, how me choosing to run the streets and me putting bad decisions and a messed up lifestyle before my children, how that affected them. Like granted, when I was running the streets, I didn't think about it like that. I didn't know no better. I didn't even know I had a choice. I legit thought my only option was what I was doing. But that's not an excuse. I should have known better. I should have tried harder. I should have did more. And for that, I've apologized to my children. I've had to take each one of them and say, look, I'm sorry. I didn't do as good as I should. I didn't make decisions that were right for you. And because of that, I had to leave you. Because I left you and went to prison, certain things happened in your life that never should have happened to you. And I'll always carry that cross. But I'm sorry. So they've forgiven me. But it took me a long time to forgive myself. It took me a long time to be able to stand in their room while they slept and look at them and not cry. To not think, damn, how did I mess up so bad with these little lives? How did running the streets, hustling, being loyal to people that wasn't even loyal to me, how did that come before my children? I messed up, but I had to forgive myself. And now I'm at a place of peace. Now I know what happened. I know my father wasn't there for me, but I know that even though he wasn't there for me for the first part of my life, when I got to a place where I could forgive him, we made up for that lost time. And because I forgave him, I discovered me. My father is deceased now, but before he died, he ended up in the best shape of his life. He was enjoying life and he was living. And I was pleased to be able to witness that, to have a good relationship with him, to be able to pop up and walk in his apartment because the door was unlocked and sit in there. And when he walked in, to see the brightness on his face after he said, hey, baby girl, I just came in from a walk. I'm supposed to be in Pennsylvania. I'm surprising him sitting in his apartment while he's out for a walk. Those are joys. I remember my dad calling me and just checking on me and the kids, asking if I was still with that guy. And he would never say the guy's name. Or he would call him the wrong name. And when I asked him about it, he would say it don't matter because they ain't going to last anyway. Like my dad was brutally honest. And just, some people would say it's ignorant. Be that as it may. That was Scoop. He would tell him straight to their face. You seem like a nice guy, but you ain't going to make it. You too soft. And I would be standing there like, oh, God, Dad. But we had those moments because I forgave him. My mom now. I see my mom as a human. As a human being, I don't have any expectation for my mother to be anything other than what she is. And that's enough. And for me, I'm not carrying guilt anymore. I can sleep at night I'm not waking up in tears. I don't look at my children and feel sorry that I'm them. I don't look at my children and feel sorry for them that they have me as a mother. I'm proud of my progress, and forgiveness has gotten me to where I am today. So I just wanted to share. This was on my heart, and I know somebody needs to hear it. So I wanted to share it today. There is power in the F word, and you hold that power. So no matter what somebody has done to you, you got the power to forgive them, and that forgiveness is going to free you. I was talking to one of my daughters, and I was talking about my ex-husband and how he tried to kill me in a bathtub. And I said, I forgive him. That's why I'm able to, when I'm in city and I see him, I can speak and we can laugh and bust it up, because I don't harbor no hate towards that man. I wish him nothing but the best. You no longer have that space in my life, but we good. I forgive him. And her response was, yeah, you better than me, because I wouldn't have been able to do that. And I understood that, because when I was where she is, I felt the same way. But I'm glad to be at a place where I know that holding that place in my mind, heart, and soul isn't hurting anybody but myself. It's like I got this big space where I can fill with things. Do I want them to be full of grudges, hatred, bitterness, emptiness, sorrow? Or do I want it to be full of light, love, promise, goals, compassion, forgiveness? I get to choose how I'm filling that up. So, I just say to you today, if you're in a place where you're still harboring ill feelings towards somebody, I'm not saying that you need to forgive them and allow them back into your life. That's not what I'm saying. Some relationships, you're supposed to forgive and move on. And some relationships, you can forgive and mend. You got to get to God on what type of relationship you're dealing with. But forgiveness, you got to do that. That's imperative. That's good for your well-being. Now, what happens after that forgiveness, that's between you and God. The F Word, Beezy Baby Podcast, episode 3. I don't know what episode 4 is going to bring. As you can see, my podcast is not mainstream. It's not just interviewing people. It's not just motivation. I'm going to be all over the place with this thing. That's why I didn't title it anything but the Beezy Baby Podcast, because whatever God puts on my heart, that's how we rolling. I appreciate y'all for listening. Leave a comment. Let me know how you feeling. If you got a forgiveness story, feel free to leave it in the comments. Each one help one. Maybe your story will be able to impact, empower, or help somebody else. Love is love.